I am coming at you with some information regarding the difference between a debt buyer and a collection agency. So how do you know the difference, and what are your options when it comes to remedying these types of debts, whether it's to settle the debt out, get it removed from your credit report, etc. The difference between a debt buyer and a collection agency and what your options are. So a debt buyer is an agency or a company, if you will, that buys the rights to delinquent debt. So like credit cards that have defaulted for more than 6 to 12 months, maybe some utility accounts, cell phone companies. These debt buyers buy all the rights, all the contracts, all the documentation on these debts that have been delinquent. And so they own the rights to these debts. They buy these debts for pennies on the dollar. Now, does this mean that the original creditor can not still pursue that debt? Well, if it's sold and they no longer own it, correct, they can no longer pursue it. They no longer owe the original creditor. That original creditor has sold all their rights of that debt to a debt buyer. And so your debt buyers are going to be companies like Midland Funding, LVNV Funding, Portfolio Recovery. These are some examples of debt buyers. Debt buyers typically buy large unpaid credit card debt. Typically, the original creditors who sell their debt to debt buyers would be companies like Chase, Citi, and Community Bank are like the top three I can think of that sell their debts to debt buyers. Other creditors like American Express or Discover, they typically hold on to their debt, and if they need to pursue collection efforts, they have their own internal collection agency or department within their company, and as well as they need to pursue litigation, they have their own attorneys. They usually will hold on to the debt or the paper in perpetuity until it's been resolved. And so with the debt buyer, these items, if you've ever disputed an account with Midland, LVNV Funding, or Portfolio, you've noticed it's been much harder to get removed through the traditional dispute process. And that's mostly because they own all the docs of the debt, all the rights to the debt. They've bought the debt, so they've made an investment. And so they're not going to let it go so easily. Not without a fight, especially if you were to dispute with one of these debt buyers and ask them to validate the debt, ask them to verify that they have proof that they own the debt, proof that the debt is valid. They usually have all of that proper documentation because Chase, Community Bank, or Citi has included that within the purchase and sell agreement. That's part of the agreement. They get all that documentation. So that's why it's typically harder to get companies like that removed from your credit report. A little background on Midland, LV, and Portfolio. Midland's located in San Diego. Portfolio, I believe, is located in New Jersey. And LVNV Funding, if you didn't know, what that stands for is that stands for Las Vegas, Nevada. So obviously they're located there. And so they buy the debts for pennies on the dollar. So I'll give you an example. If Chase has an unpaid credit card of about $2,000, and Midland may buy that debt for $200 to $300, right? And that may be a little high, or it may be right, but it's typically pennies on the dollar. I'd say anywhere between 2 to maybe 20 cents on the dollar. And I think that the value goes up depending on how recently that debt was charged off, what state is the consumer in. So depending on the state laws that are there, are they consumer friendly or are they not? All of those factor into the value of the debt, of what a debt buyer will pay for that unpaid debt. A collection agency The difference between a collection agency and a debt buyer is that a collection agency does not own the debt. They collect for a creditor or even a debt buyer, and they earn a commission off of what they collect, but they don't have rights to the debt. Like, they don't own it, they don't have the documentation. They are just collecting on behalf of original creditor or a debt buyer. There's different laws that they need to follow. Collection agencies are heavily mandated by the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. So they have a lot of laws, including the TCPA, which is the Telephone Communication Practices Act. So, they have a lot of different regulations and rules they have to follow, whereas the debt buyer is I guess excused, if you will, from certain parts of the Fair Debt Collection and Practices Act, because in that case they're not a debt collector if they're merely stepping in the shoes of the original creditor. It would be their collection agency that they've hired or that have internal that would be held to those FDCPA and TCPA rules and laws and regulations. So I am telling you this so you know who you're dealing with, right? Let's say that you have an account on your credit report and it's owned by one of those debt buyers, and then eventually you get a summons to appear in court, which means the creditor is trying to sue you over the unpaid debt because they haven't been able to collect. Your options when it comes to this, and again, this is not legal advice, I am not an attorney, I am giving you an example of just a decade worth of clients that I've worked with and dealt with, and what their options have been when it came down to this situation. So if you are sued, we have found that your options are really two things. One, settle the debt before it goes to court, or two, I'm going to walk back the other way, or the second option would be to fight it, meaning you show up in court, hire an attorney, request validations, request documents on the debt, to assume that your signatures are on the debt, things like that, right? Fight it or settle outside of the court to avoid having to deal with the whole litigation process. So if you were to settle, most debt buyers will settle at about 50 cents on the dollar. Straight out of court, they'll settle right around 50 cents on a dollar. That's usually going to be your best deal that you're going to be able to get. And for an example, if you have a credit card, or Midland Funding is collecting on behalf, or not collecting, but owns one of your unpaid Chase credit cards, the amount is $2,000. Midland would settle for $1,000 plus their fees. So let's just say like $1,200, and they'll accept it in one payment, maybe two or three, and then that's the end of it. Moving on, they won't proceed litigation, they won't go to court. That debt is settled, and you're moving on. If you're going to fight it, this is where it's a good idea to get an attorney involved, and because there's certain things they need to have in front of a court hearing. They do need to. The burden of proof is on them. They need to prove that the debt is valid. They own the debt. They have a copy of the purchase and sale agreement from the original creditor, and they can essentially validate that the debt is accurate and the amount's legit, belonging to you, things like that. But I appreciate you listening in. Hope this information was valuable. If it was helpful to you, do me a favor, like this post, like this video, or drop comments letting me know, and that way I can continue doing more. And if I get at least 100 likes, I'll do another video where I will show you a way to get a Midland account removed, or an LVNV funding, remove some advanced tactics around them. So I'm Joe Chavarria. Thanks for watching.
Get a little dope, I said, Bill.